Hello, everyone. My name is Brendan Pugh, and this is Writing Quest. Today we have Mark Timmony with us. He is the author of The Blood of the Spear. It's book one of I believe, a trilogy, The Eye of Eternity. And so we're glad to have you.
More than a
Welcome to the
trilogy.
show. More than a trilogy? All right.
Yeah.
You'll tell us all about it then.
I will,
So,
yeah.
how
I
are you
haven't
today?
really. I'm really well, thank you. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me. How are you?
good. I'm doing good.
Excellent.
So, why don't you dive into tell us who you are, how you got started with this whole writing thing, and then we can talk about it being more than a trilogy.
Yeah, sure. So, as you said, Mark Timmony. I live in Sydney, Australia. I have been reading fantasy for many years now. I started when I entered what was my high school. I discovered in the library The Dragons of Autumn Twilight by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, first book of the Dragonlance Chronicles.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd always liked books, but I'd never, been a big reader. And then I found that book and I never looked back. It was like all the things that I imagined, my daydreams of dragons and wizards and knights and some of the cartoons that I'd watched was like in a book form. And that was amazing. And from there, I just started searching. So obviously I found The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And it was at the time that David Eddings was really big, and Raymond E. Feist, and even the early Dune books. I just kept reading from there. And it was always something I decided that I wanted to do. I would get so excited by reading these books and these stories and adventures that I wanted to write something that made other people feel like that too. And then I think it was about 1990, maybe 1991, I came across The Wheel of Time, so The Eye of the World, and that really cemented for me that this is what I want to do. This is what I want to spend my time doing: world building, magic systems, creating great sweeping sagas. And so I was one of those people who read Wheel of Time and waited patient or impatiently for each book. So I read it as it was released over the years.
Yeah.
Got Game of Thrones as well. Same thing there. Still waiting for that. But yeah, I fell into that. Funnily enough, I never really got into Dungeons and Dragons or the role-playing games. A lot of people are surprised that I never went that route either. But I guess none of my friends were really into it where I lived, so I was never exposed to that. Obviously, I knew that Dragonlance was part of a campaign setting, and I understood what TSR and, at the time, TSR, then Wizards of the Coast, and Dungeons and Dragons was, but I was never really that captured with the idea of playing a game or doing a role-playing adventure. But then in the early mid-2000s, I discovered World of Warcraft, and I've been playing that like ever since, with only one or two breaks. And that became my version of role-playing games or campaigns. So I guess I like the visual element more in being able to do that and playing those sorts of things. So yeah, big geek. Obviously, I've done all the Star Wars, Star Trek, more Star Wars than Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica, all that sort of stuff as well. Never big in sports. I was always in the library during school, reading more books. The idea or the world setting for my Eye of Eternity series began in my final years of school. I've still got Notepad somewhere, probably in my cupboard, that has the original maps and stuff, because I love maps. I always loved maps in fantasy books. I would hand draw my own map.
Oh yeah.
The map that's in The Blood of the Spear was originally hand drawn by me. I've since handed it over to graphic designers and artists, and they've fixed the rendering, but all of that's my original design. And yeah, I did all of that. I managed to get online and become a member of Janie Wirtz's online forums for the Walls of Light and Shadow sequence. And so I've had lots of conversations with her over the years, and she was kind enough to blurb Blood of the Spear for me. So that was really cool. Got lots of writing advice through the years from her as well, just in general, passing on the knowledge, paying it forward type stuff. And yeah, loved the political side of the Empire trilogy she did with Feist. I thought that was amazing. Kind of closest I've ever come to that is Game of Thrones. So there's not a lot of, well, for me, the type of skullduggery and political machinations that went on in those books are kind of more my cup of tea than I found elsewhere. The closest I can find is Game of Thrones, but very different settings. So it's all the sort of stuff that I'm trying to bring into Blood of the Spear. Doesn't really show in the first book, but I'm about probably 2/3 of the way through book 2 at the moment, and yeah, things are heating up on that front. So that's interesting. Different
cool.
feel in the story for me.
So it sounds like you're definitely a big fan of the longer series. I definitely have never. So I'm working my way through Wheel of Time right now. I took a little bit of a break because I discovered that much later. But I actually have never read Game of Thrones. I watched the first season and it was a little too much blood and guts and that kind of stuff for me. But then, with him not finishing the last book, I'm just kind of waiting. So I'll read it, but I'm like, I'm nervous to start it and then be waiting for the book and all that.
Yes, showing my age, I grew up in that era where you waited for books to finish. Like they weren't all, released every 6 months. Like sometimes it'd be 18 months, 2 years before you get the next book. And reading a big series that translated to years of waiting, decades. And so that's okay. There's always something else to read in the meantime, maybe not as for me, not as exciting as the book I was waiting on, but we'd get there. So I used to have this absolute desperation, I've got to get the next book. I can't wait for the next Game of Thrones book to come out. I've got to read it. And now that I've seen the whole series, and I understand that there's going to be differences between what was shown on TV and the path of, he's already said, one of the characters has gone a completely different path to what he'd originally said the plot was to the writers of the TV show. And so there are changes that are going to be happening, but the actual main thrust of the story and what happens, presumably, at the end is basically the same. So now I'm like, oh, well, I know what happens or where the story's going. I get now what's going to go on. So that entire that whole eagerness for the next book, it's there, but it's also like, whenever.
A little diminished.
It's fine. Yeah, it is. And look, to be completely honest with you, I thought that the last book was hugely overwritten. And there were entire characters was an entire character and storyline that started and ended in the book. And I was kind of like, what? Yeah, I've been waiting for so long for this book. What was the point of that particular story that needed to be in there? I didn't understand. So, different choices. And by the time the next book comes out, I guess it'll have been a couple of years since the show has finished and since I read Dance of Dragons, or With Dragons, whatever it's called, that, it will be a little bit new, won't be as fresh in my mind. So, go back in.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a brilliant writer. His writing is so good. So if for no other reason than to read his sentences is enough to read the book. And I think the TV, certainly the first season, was true to the book, but I don't recall it being as, blood and guts as they depicted. I mean, it probably was, and you just don't get the same impact in your head, or you gloss over it a bit. But it is probably more adult in many ways in terms of themes that are presented than perhaps Wheel of Time was in the novels. And, it's different stories.
Let me see if I can wrap this question up. So let's talk about where you're going with your series, and then how then are you kind of thinking about, because like Robert Jordan, he'd passed before he finished Wheel of Time. We've still got George Martin still kind of figuring this out. So how long are you planning your series, and are you ever nervous that you're like, maybe I'll never get this done, or what,
Actually, well, I mean, that maybe I should be nervous, but I probably shy away from thoughts of my own mortality more than anything else, so I don't consider it too much. But So I know the end of the story, and I know the basic points that I want each book to finish on to get to that end. There are going to be 7 books in the series and a couple of standalones that may come in between. Like I've got one that's coming between book 2 and book 3, which I'll start working on as soon as I send book 2 off to my beta readers. Because one of the things that it's been a couple of years since I released book 1, and one of the reasons, apart from life getting in the way the last 2 years, I kind of stopped writing while I was waiting for feedback and, doing all the production side of book 1 to get it out there. And that, for me, I need to be writing constantly to keep it flowing. If I stop, it's like I've got to build that momentum up again. So
like
one of the
pushing the boulder and getting started is the hardest part.
Yeah, 100%. So one of the things that I'm planning now is that, right, I'm not going to rest on my laurels and take a break while I'm waiting for feedback on book 2. I'll start pushing ahead with writing book 2.5, and so that's happening. I do find it difficult to work on another project when the previous project is not completely wrapped up. I like doing one job at a time. So this whole multitasking thing, I'm not the best at it, but I'm going to give it a shot, because I don't want to be waiting. I don't want to wait or work for years at a time on a single book, or have people who are actually invested in the story and waiting on the next book to wait that long either.
Yeah. Do you have so it sounds like, I think most longer fantasy series, I suppose, except for in the case of George Martin, but definitely requires a lot more outlining, for sure, like planning. And so do you seems like you really enjoy the world building aspect. Are you definitely more of an outliner, or how do you kind of go about your writing process?
So with book 1, I wasn't as much of an outliner. I have the main points, and I got to interview Elizabeth Moon once in my days working at Galaxy Bookshop, and she described her process, which I thought was it is actually quite similar to mine. It was like she was standing at the top of a plateau, looking out across a mist-filled valley, and she can see, there's a peak of a hill over there that's poking out of the mist, and there's another place over there, but she doesn't know what the lay of the land in between the hills is like, and she has to go through that to get to those hills. So she has these points that she's planning to reach, and as she goes on her hike, she's discovering what the lay of the land is between them. And that's kind of like how I see what I do myself. I have these plot points or these peaks that I can see that I want to get to, but the details of how I'm actually going to get there, I kind of discover as I go. As I've been writing book 2, there's been a lot more planning happening or outlining for book 2 than there was in book 1. At the end of book 2, they're the main characters that you've been following through the first book without any real spoiler. There, for whatever reasons, the group becomes separated, and so book 2. So while, as in book 1, I could follow, they were all together for most of the chapters, and you could do different point of views for different chapters, but they're all together, so they're all experiencing the same story, just you relating it through a different character's eyes. I now have these characters are separated, and they have to follow their own stories, and I have to give those stories. It's like I'm writing a couple of different books at the same time, to be honest, because I've got all these main characters who are in different places doing different things that are all eventually, at different points in the series come back together. And I've got to work out where they are at any given time and what's going on with them. And I found when I started writing book 2, I wrote book 1 sequentially, so chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, the whole way through. This time around, I found that I felt like I was getting momentum in one character and one character's story, and then I would stop and switch to another character for the next chapter and have to start that whole process of building momentum up again. So I stopped doing that, and I was like, right, I'm taking this character and I'm writing all their chapters. because they're completely separate from everybody else and they're not going to interact with them, so I don't need to think what other people are doing. And so I did that, and I finished their chapters, and now I've gone back and I've done part of another one, and then I'm following one of the main characters. There are two main characters and then secondary characters around them, and I'm doing one of the main characters at the moment, and I'm nearly finished their story. I think. Yeah, I am. It's not I think. I'm past the halfway mark, but this manuscript is becoming huge, and it's kind of stressing me out because of the word count. When I've still got another, the second main character's story to write as well.
Yeah.
So what I've done is I've actually created a calendar for this world. So I've got named months of the year and the seasons and all that sort of stuff. And I've created a calendar. And on this calendar, I write, this chapter starts on this date. So I know over the course of a year or 2 years, however long the story goes, I know where these events are happening. And then when I go and write another character, they all start from the same point. But you might skip a couple of weeks between the end of one chapter and the beginning of the next, and I am able to color code the different characters and write up where this chapter that I'm writing is actually happening in relation to the other stories, the other characters' stories going on around it. So there's a lot more planning and outlining in that regard for this one. And I broke down the chapters that I'm writing for these characters when I'm writing them, and I'm like, write all the points that I want to hit and the events that I want to have happen, and to get to the end point. And I don't enjoy the process of outlining, because I feel when I write in point form, everything just sounds naff. It just sounds so stupid when I write it in point form and elementary, and it's just like, oh, gross. It's just like, I wouldn't even want to read this. But then when you go and you write it out and you flesh the ideas and you put the character into it, and you have dialogue and interaction with other things, it becomes a different thing. But just the point form of it, I don't like it. So I struggle with that part until I can actually get into to writing it out, and it's become useful. So because I'm only focusing on one character, I'm sometimes worried about what other parts of the story are happening, because I'm not writing it sequentially. Having that to rely on, it's like, right, so this is where we're going next. And sometimes characters and events that happen that I wasn't expecting pop up, and so I might go off script a little bit, and then I'm like, well, hold on, do I want to follow this, and how will it fit into the rest of what I've written here? And sometimes those are the best things, like they're the most exciting, and for me, new and interesting, because they seem to have come from my subconscious. It's just like, been bubbling away in the background, and when I start following the thread of what's come up, or where the potential it has, it starts connecting to all these other points that I had in mind for the story that I hadn't fleshed out fully, and then all of us, it's just become this exciting, I don't know, it feels more vibrant and more real when it's just happening and flowing, rather than, right, here's a list of the things that I need to have happen, and I've got to take this and write it into here. It just but that's in my head more than anything else, I think, that feeling, that expectation.
Yeah, I understand that. I started being pretty heavy outliner, because so my series has, I'm working on the prequel novella in book 1 now, but my outlining for it has kind of grown to, I'm at about 13 books is where I want it to sit now.
Yeah.
And so I originally was going through and really kind of heavy detail outlining, because I just felt like I needed a lot of those details to line up. And then I found, as I would go back and write, that I deviated a lot, because the characters would pull me in a certain direction, or I'd have an idea. And so I kind of started this is the character arc that I need the character to go on, or that the story, for what I want to do later.
Yeah.
So I kind of have these more, now it's just kind of vague, I need the character to end up here.
Yeah.
But I leave myself a little space, because I'm the same. I like to outline, but it can get boring. I feel like it sounds dumb. Like I'm like, no, it's not gonna work. I totally get all that.
Yeah.
So I found like giving myself very vague, not vague, more general, just this is what I need it to kind of go. Leaves me room to come up with stuff while I'm writing. Because I'm also
100%.
the prequel I'm working on, there's elements of the last book that are in the prequel.
Yeah.
So it's a real, like, so I have to think through it a bit, but I'm trying to find a way to make sure it's still open enough that I don't trap myself.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, funnily enough, my prequel, Starbinder, it's the novella. It was the original prologue I had written for Blood of the Spear many, many years ago. And like, I picked it out because I picked it. How do I describe this without giving any spoilers away? It's about a starbinder. So a starbinder are a class of, or an organization within the world of Sobia, which is where I set the story on the continent of Athme. And they were prior to a great sundering many years before the start of the story. They were very much prevalent in society, and they were historians and healers and lawmakers and counselors to kings. And in this sundering, their order was kind of fell apart and disappeared, but they are still around in much fewer numbers than they are this character who is a starbinder in Blood of the Spear. I wanted to originally thought that I was going to flesh her background out more, so which I didn't do, and that was one of the reasons I thought, you know what, I had this prologue where I actually started with starbinders, maybe I should do something with that. And it was set. The setting is much earlier than the start of the book. It's the book that ended up being Blood of the Spear, which I got changed a number of times. So I was like, let's fill this little novella out. This would be a good place to go. And I took the prologue that I had written, and I was writing omniscient narration, and the magic systems were totally different. Pantheon and the mythology was completely different. So there was a lot of changing, but it became quite easy to change and to adapt because I'd spent so much time writing Blood of the Spear and sorting all that stuff out and making a canon in my head that, and in my notes, that when it came to fitting this prologue, I was able to adjust it quite easily. This novella, turning this prologue that had been discarded into a novella, I was able to adjust it quite easily. That in many ways also gave me the opportunity to put some stuff into it that will reflect in the series further down the track. Like I already know where the books are going, and so I was able to foreshadow some stuff in this novella for later, which was exciting as well.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So let's, I'd love to talk to you about, so you worked in a bookstore. I kind of read through your bio on your website, and you worked in a bookstore, and you met a lot of people that kind of helped, like you talked to them about the business, you learned some of the business side of things. Yeah. What was that experience like? And then what were some of the things that you learned through that process?
It's hard to quantify. It's also so long ago now, what I learned. So working at Galaxy, which is still around today, it's not in its own store anymore. It's owned by another independent bookshop, Abby's, and it's inside Abby's separately, but as its own thing. But we used to have our own store, and I'm no longer there. It's not a we anymore. And they would it had built its business on importing to Australia books, fantasy and science fiction books that weren't readily available in Australia from the US market, because most of our stuff comes from the UK market. Not so much these days. Times have changed a lot, but certainly before the advent of Amazon and things like that, a lot of the writers who were published by Door didn't particularly get picked up by UK publishers, which meant they didn't get seen in Australia, as an example. Even some of the Del Rey, like some of the bigger Del Rey authors would be picked up in the UK, but not all of them. So there was a lot of stuff like that was brought over. But being a specialist shop, we got to, local authors would come in frequently. Over my time, I've got to meet, I met Sarah Douglas, who unfortunately is no longer with us, Karen Miller, Jennifer Fallon, Trudy Canavan, Ian Irvain. I haven't met in person Tony Shillito, but I spoke to him quite a bit. He's in South Australia, so a bit far away. So a lot quite well-known fantasy authors. Fiona McIntosh, who's gone on to a lot of stuff with crime fiction now, but still has her fantasy series. We also got to meet George R. R. Martin when he came to Sydney, Robin Hobb, Richard Morgan, people like that. So working in a specialist store, a few of the writers, I worked as a beta reader for Jennifer Fallon as a reader of science fiction fantasy, and she reached out and she was looking for more male perspectives from readers. So I did that with her. I also did that for Karen Miller, who has become a really good friend. And just being on the other side of the manuscript writing process and seeing an author's manuscript finished and talking to them about the story and giving feedback and listening to them, just interacting with them on what they can do differently or ideas they get from listening to feedback, just showed me a different side of the writing process. I mean, I guess I never went to university or studied writing as a career path or as something or as further education. I didn't do creative writing at university or studied English literature or anything like that. It's all self-taught. And I guess in some ways I probably had this idea in my head that you write the manuscript and then it's done. You might rewrite it a couple of times, but I had no real depth of understanding as to the different sorts of processes or the things that you need to look at in terms of character development and story structure and the beats of story and what you want to hit and how to do all of that. So getting to work with these writers opened my eyes to that. And as well, working at Galaxy, one of the things we would do is we would read books and review. And the reviews could never be just, oh my God, it was amazing, it was so good, you need to read it. You need to talk about, like, why was it so good? Why did it work for you? And if it didn't work for you, and giving a negative review is fine, but justify why it didn't work for you. Explain. It's not just like this writer doesn't know how to write and it's been done before and better. And it's like, well, cool, maybe it has, but, talk about where you're coming from with those things. So learning to critique and critiquing for beta reading helped me a lot in being able to critique my own stuff to advance it from a first draft stage to a second or third or fourth draft before I then passed it out to third parties to have a look at and give me. So rather than doing writing courses and I guess learning that sort of stuff in writing courses, I kind of learnt it on the fly working in a bookstore where I interacted with professional authors and editors, because HarperCollins Voyager was just starting, well, not just starting up, well, it kind of was just starting up. And they had one editor at HarperCollins in Sydney, Stephanie Smith, she spearheaded Voyager in Australia. And their offices ended up being a couple of streets away from where we were in the city of Sydney. So I got to meet Stephanie, I got to talk to her, and I got to talk to the HarperCollins people a lot as well. So just getting to know that side of the business, the marketing and what what the editors do and what they're looking for at the time, this was many years ago now, was just seeing that side of the business was pretty eye-opening as well.
I like what you're saying about reviews. I've done some reviews on my YouTube channel, but I'm a very slow reader, so it ended up not being like super viable for me to keep doing that. But what I always tried to do, even for books I really, really loved, I always tried to do kind of like 5 things I liked, 5 things I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Like keep it, because nothing is perfect. Even in the classics, Lord of the Rings. Like Lord of the Rings is not a no one panic, but like Lord of the Rings is not a perfect book. And so I always tried to, because I think I like, even with the things that are almost even if you love them, there's still some things that maybe aren't great. But even books that you don't like, well, they're not complete. Like there's still some good things in there. So I think it's always good and fair to pick, and I think readers want that. They want to hear. They don't want to just hear like, oh, it was amazing and it was so great. Like that's not a review,
Yeah. One of the Aussie authors that I did work with as well, Glenda Lark, one of the things she always said is that she loved reading, not particularly about her own work, but she liked negative or one-star reviews because she would often find that the things that the reviewer was saying that they didn't like about the book sounded interesting to her. So she'd be like, oh, I actually want to read this now and see if it's as interesting as it sounds. So that's always something to keep in mind. One man's trash is another man's treasure. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it can be the same with books.
So your book's been out for a few years. How do you handle reviews and getting reviews? And if you get a bad one or a good one, how does that?
I've gotten better at dealing with that. When I first started writing, and Stephanie Smith, who was the editor at HarperCollins Voyager, had offered to read the book and give me feedback. And some of the feedback she gave me was needed and not even harsh, but it wasn't glowing praise. And it was like, it knocked the wind out of me for a good 6 months. It was awful. I did not take that very well. But I was also tenacious, and I just kept going at it. Like I said, it took me 6 months to get over it, and then so I gave it another go, and I took on board some of the things that was said and changed a lot of stuff. And now when I see so more adept's not the right word. It became easier. And maybe I'm not taking it as personally as I used to. Instead, I try to take the ideas that they're expressing and see how it could fit or how I might apply them, and if I feel I need to apply them differently. And that was from a beta reading perspective. But once the book's out there and it's out in the world, it's been written, and people don't embrace it the way I might have hoped that they would. I know it's not a reflection on me as a person. My book's separate to me, although it's my work. Sometimes it becomes one of the things that I found confusing was I would have some reviewers saying how character driven the story is and there's no info dumping, and then another person would come along and say, oh, the characters are all one dimensional and sound the same and there's so much info dumping. And I'm like, well, who do I believe? I like to go with the person who's saying how great it is. That's wonderful, and it's giving it four stars. It's like, yeah, fantastic. But like the other person's saying the opposite. It's like, well, thanks for taking the time to give it a go. Sorry it didn't work for you. It used to be what I found as well is we tend to focus on negative feedback. Rather than positive feedback. And it takes, I can't remember the specifics now, but it's something like we focus on negative feedback twice as long as we do on positive feedback, or it might even be more than twice as long. And it used to be that negative feedback would take the wind out of my sails. For when the first time I got feedback on the manuscript, 6 months. Now feedback on the manuscript doesn't take the wind out of my sails at all. It's more like, all right, well, what can I change? What can I do differently? Is there anything for me to use in this feedback? Can I see how it might work? When I read a negative review, it used to be a couple of days. Then it was like maybe a day. Then it was like 3 hours. And now it's like, damn, didn't work for this person. Next. And I know there's the whole idea that you shouldn't read your own reviews, like stay away from them. And I certainly don't interact with reviewers because it's none of my business, what they're saying about my book. And it's not for me that they're saying it, but for other readers or their own audience. So I don't interact like that, certainly not publicly. And I've never, having been a reviewer myself, I wouldn't want to put a bad review or what could be perceived as a negative review out in the world that's coming from a place of honesty for me, and then have the author and their friends, come after me. So never done that in my life to a reviewer. Some of the reviewers who I have personally, interacted with and provided a copy, and it didn't work for them, and they've said so in the review, I've just messaged saying, thanks so much for your time. Sorry it didn't work for you, and you just move on. I move on from that. But it just became I don't know. Is it developing a thick skin? It's developing slight separation between you as the writer and them as the reader, and understanding that it isn't personal, and for every person it does work for, you're going to find someone it doesn't work for. Maybe they might, if it's a particularly in-depth review as to the reasons it didn't work for them, there might be something in there that I could go, all right, so maybe next time, or in the book I'm currently working on, that's something that I can do differently, or look at approaching in another way. However, you're not always going to make everybody happy. And when you're getting feedback, if one person is the only one who's saying something about a particular scene or a particular character or a particular event, and none of your other readers are, then that might only be an issue for that person. If lots of your readers or your feedback that you're getting feedback from are saying the same thing about the same character or the same scene, then that's something that you should really, go take a minute and go, all right, hold on. This isn't working for more than one person. Why? What can I do differently? How can I adjust? And there's that whole thing of like making mistakes or getting feedback that you're going in the wrong direction is something that you should be grateful for, because it gives you the opportunity to recalibrate and to readjust the course you're on. That next time there's an improvement.
Yeah, I think it depends too on I'm hoping that by the time I publish my prequel novella or my first book, that YouTube will have really hardened me to this process, because you get a lot of comments, of course, and I'm not a huge channel, but I'm big enough that I get some comments, and I've gotten it depends for me on what the comment is. Yeah. So I'm generally fine if people disagree with what I said. Yeah. Like, that doesn't generally bug me. But then, you get one where like someone will be like, you move your hands too much. And I'm like, well, Yeah. And so I think when it comes to the book stuff, I think it would definitely for me be like, if you have a negative review, but you have something constructive in there, like that's fine. Because then it's like, okay, well, you didn't like it. I don't like that you didn't like it, but I'm glad that you gave me, a constructive reason, maybe. Whereas if you just like, this book sucks and I don't like you, well, that doesn't help me at all. And
I think, I've gotten to the point where I can let those ones go now. Like I read it and I dismiss it. Like, okay, next. If there's more to it, then that can be a little bit like, okay, hold on, what are they saying? What can I do differently? But if it's just like, this sucks, and I don't like the way you look at the camera or something like that, it's like, right, this is the face I got, sort of stuff. I was watching a documentary on Netflix about and this is something I think, being a writer, you're obviously putting yourself out to the public. Musicians and, people on shows like American Idol or The Voice or X Factor put themselves out much more. I don't know. It's like they're out there a lot faster and they get their feedback a lot faster on social media. And not all of that is nice. And the social media aspect of that feedback can be really, really harsh and personal.
Yeah.
And I guess you get that as a writer as well, but it's not often that it's a personal attack. As somebody who reviews things on a video platform, it could be a personal attack. And I don't think it's kind of not fair. Like, you're presenting content. Let's review the content, not the person doing it.
Right.
I mean, Singer or something, they're kind of these days bundled up as the whole package. You got to have a particular look, style, sound, gimmick to find a market. So kind of, it's not nice, but I kind of get why there's personal attacks against those people too, as well as praise. So this is, a step removed as a writer You often don't get those. It's not as personal. Although your books are your babies, so it can feel that way. But I think over time, and it depends on the person too. When I started, it was a lot harder for me to get past what I considered to perceive to be a personal attack. And it's only time and experience of being exposed to more of it that you get the opportunity to learn or become familiar with the feelings you're experiencing when it happens, that you can take that step to go, it's not as bad, and the feeling that you're feeling at the moment will pass. And your first bad review, and it's like nobody else is ever going to pick up my book because this person has said it's like X, Y, and Z, and have given me a 1 star or no stars, or they gave me 1 star because they had to leave us. They couldn't give no stars, and it was like, oh my god, no, that's awful. But you're like, okay, next. Sorry, it didn't work. Keep going, keep going. I hope you learn and get better, and things become different for you.
So speaking of putting yourself out there and being out on social media and all that stuff, your website, by the way, is really great, structured well, functions well. What are some of your tips and thoughts about marketing for authors, or how have you gone about marketing for yourself?
I've gone about it very poorly, in my opinion. I'm not great with social media. I watch, people like Andy Pelican, who gets on doing reels on Instagram all the time and reviews. I'm a slow reader, so certainly these days when I'm trying to write as well, my reading time has been curtailed a lot. And I also find these days that if it's something I'm not enjoying, I'm not going to finish it. So I'm kind of like, I don't want to start talking about it, and then find what I liked at the beginning by the midway through I don't like anymore, and I don't want to finish this book. So how do I go about it? So I did the website, obviously, and I spent a bit of money and got an outfit in to web designers to do it. They've done a number of different authors. Rocket, oh God, I'm going to forget the name, Rocket Expansion or something, their name is. They're based in South Africa. They did a couple of different authors' websites, and that's how I found them. I used to review books more. If you noticed on there, I haven't done anything for a long time. I find that when I'm writing first drafting, I don't really have the time or the headspace to keep reading other stuff and writing reviews about it, so that's kind of dried up. I have a newsletter, which I have not sent anything out since earlier this year, when I wanted to give an update as to where I am to the people who have actually signed up to it. If you sign up to the newsletter, you do get access to the novella Starbinder. You can get it for free. Or if you don't want to sign up to the newsletter, you can buy it for 99 cents on Kindle on Amazon. So that was one of the ways that I tried marketing. I liked Instagram because I could put pretty pictures up and not have to do videos myself, and it's become now a story and reel thing, and I'm like, trying to come up with ideas for me for things like that, it's not natural. And then I can watch somebody else's go, oh, that's a great idea. But then I'm like, everyone's seen it because that person's done it. So now I'm just copying them.
Yeah.
Twitter, X, I use that, but it's more, I'm not a big one for putting my every thought online or opinion. I guess having worked in the book selling, where I sold lots of books to lots of different people, even books that I didn't like, you kind of get used to going, yeah, it's great. Yeah, this person's, and I also don't like putting people down. So I kind of keep my opinions to myself. So Twitter becomes a little like, well, what am I going to say? So I try and put things, personal stuff happened to me on there occasionally, but then I forget about it because I just don't share. So I don't feel that I'm a very good example of marketing. Certainly when I first published, I was throwing books away, like as in handing them out to anyone who might do a review or an interview, or put my hand up for a podcast or a YouTube interview. That has slowed down while I'm really trying to buckle down to get book 2 done. But it's something I need to work on a bit more. But I also feel like if I'm constantly plugging Blood of the Spear on my channels, then people are going to get bored of it. But then I'm told by marketing people that no, you have to, because it takes a number of times that they've seen it before they start thinking about it.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah,
I
for
don't
my
have any good answer.
day job, I have helped with some marketing, and it's definitely one of those, you put stuff out there, you feel like you've said it 1,000 times and you're boring people to death. And then you talk to someone and they're like, oh, I didn't know about that. I'm like, right, what?
Yeah.
Like, we've said it so many times,
Yeah.
I like, I just kind of got into the Instagram game. I mostly focused on YouTube. I was like, I got to do YouTube. Like, that's enough work as it is.
Yes.
Now that that's grown enough, I've started getting into, I use X and I use Instagram mostly. Instagram is good for the posting, like pictures and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And kind of general status updates. The X I've found much more useful, not so much for posting things, but for just finding other authors and asking for interviews and communicating. And so that's kind of how I use them.
Yeah,
that way.
100%. I mean, I do interact with other authors on there. I tend to respond to their posts rather than do my own posts. That's asking for a response. Instagram, favorite writers, when I get new books by them, books that are like insta-buys sort of thing, I'll put up those these days. And then I try to intersperse a book post with an artwork post, because I often get inspiration from pieces of fantasy art. That will often inspire me. In fact, the main thrust of the Blood of the Spear story, while Jordan was the one who inspired me, I wanted to write a Wheel of Time. And I was like, well, yeah, but you can't actually rewrite Wheel of Time because it's just like too obvious. It's too well known. It's like, well, what's my story? So for years I worked on building this world and then trying to find a story to play out on this setting. Or this stage, and a piece of artwork by Larry Elmore caught my eye one day, and I was like, wow, what's this about? What are these two fighting about? And the story I made up in my head for that became the basis, the nucleus for what is the story that's unraveling in unfolding in the Eye of Eternity, my series. So the Instagram, I try to post book post, fantasy art post. So, and then it looks better on the thing. Occasionally I'll do a reel or a story and actually put my face out there, which I'm hugely uncomfortable doing. This is fine because I'm talking to somebody else. When I'm doing it in front of the camera by myself to engage with people, I'm like, what am I doing? I don't know.
Well, I'm getting used to the sound of your own voice, and like I remember when I first started YouTube, just being like, I was like weirded out by myself. Like, I'm just like, what? Yeah. So no, I totally get it, 100% for sure.
Yeah. So that's why I feel like my marketing is not it's not the best. Certainly when I release a book, I always try to do a tour. So then I'm getting other people to help me get the word out, certainly. And from that, and the people who have reviewed Blood of the Spear positively and are excited about it, I've reached out to see if they want to be on the ARC team for book 2. So I've got a list I need to, when I actually get it ready, I'll need to contact them again and say, hey, you know how I asked you 3 years ago if you wanted to read book 2? It's ready. Are you still interested?
Yeah.
And I'll do a book tour for book 2 as well. I might do a general call out publicly for people for more people who might be interested to build that team up a bit more, because I didn't do any of that the first time around. I think you only get one chance to make a first impression with your book, and I stuffed that first impression up with Blood of the Spear. I lost.
Yeah.
I just didn't hit any traction because I was so concerned with getting it out to go into Spiffbo that I forgot about all the other stuff. And then I got into Spiffbo, and you kind of have this idea that once it's in there, it's going to be talked about all the time. And it's like, but unless yours is one of the first books that the group you're in picks up to try and they discard you early, you get not going through. There's silence for like 6 to 8 months before you might be pushed to the next round, and it's just like, ugh. And then depending on the group you're in, they may be chatty about the books they're reading, or they may not be. I had this whole idea that getting into that was going to do a whole heap of marketing for me, and it's like, you still need to do more. Don't put all your eggs into one basket.
Yeah. Well, this has been really fun. We're pushing an hour here, so I was kind of like to end with just asking, but if you had maybe a tip or two that for like new authors or people just getting into this, or even someone jumping into the self-publishing world, what would be some advice that you had for them?
For somebody just starting out, I would say just write. Just write the book, get it done. There's a lot of, I found, and have found with some people that I've spoken to, that there's a lot of hesitation about being ready, and how many times they're going to have to do, how many drafts they have to do. Just get it written, get it out there, maybe do a second draft, get some feedback, preferably not from a spouse or a family member, a friend or somebody who's got some experience with writing or in the industry. If they're willing to give it to you, that's really helpful. Always make sure you hire an editor. They're expensive, but a good editor is worth their weight in gold, not just for typos and grammar, but for story, for manuscript development. So an assessment of what you've written and the story that you've produced, the breakdown of the characters and characterization, all that sort of stuff, and learn from those things, because it's real. I'm not saying it's real life, but this is the work. This is an expert in their field, and that's what you're looking for. Most freelance editors will have a day job as well, but there are some out there who that's all they do is freelance editing. So finding a good freelance editor who will take the time to point out things you're doing wrong, listen to them, learn from them, and just using Pro Writing Aid to go through your manuscript or something, it's not enough. You really need another person who's got a degree behind them, and you're paying for feedback. It's worth it. It's expensive, but it is worth it 100%. And I'd never put a manuscript out there that hadn't had a real life person who's a professional go over it. I spent a lot of money on the Blood of the Spear before I got it out there in terms of editing, which is funny because some of the reviews are like, it needs a good editor. And it's like, well, it's had multiple good editors go through it. So, any mistakes in there are mine, not theirs.
Yeah.
So that's the big advice. It's do the writing and find a good editor, a reputable one, who won't be afraid to say to you, this isn't working. One of my final editors who I worked with, who also on Blood of the Spear and who did our binder for me, one of the first things she said to me was like, okay, the first 10 chapters, they're just boring. And so she said it was really hard for her to say, but she had to say it because she wouldn't be doing her job otherwise. And I basically ripped those out and reworked them, took the pieces that were needful, the information that was needed for the story, and wrote a whole new first chapter and a couple of other chapters to take the place of the 10 that I pulled out. But you want an editor who's going to tell you things like that. That's not to say that what you write isn't going to work and it's not going to be, require minimal work, but sometimes it requires more than you were expecting, and having somebody who is able to say that to you is invaluable. Yeah. So do the writing, just do it. Don't hold back. You don't need to wait and get yourself ready. There is no I think motivation is garbage. It's never there when you need it. Just do the work. Nobody's going to do it for you, and you learn as you go, and then find an editor, a good editor.
Yeah. Perfect. Love it. Okay. Well, where can we find you? Where on all the socials and all that stuff?
Yep. So you can find me, just search for Mark Timmony. That's my name. My Instagram is Mark Timmony. My Twitter is Mark Timmony. My website is marktimmony.com. And obviously, you can find my book by going to Amazon or any good online bookstore and searching in Mark Timmony, and my stuff will appear for you.
All right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, of course. Glad to have you. And whenever you get book 2 out, we'll definitely have you on again for sure.
Yeah, thank you. That would be great.
Yeah. So thanks everyone for watching. My name is Brendan Pugh. This is Mark Timmony on Writing Quest. Make sure to check out his book, The Blood of the Spear. We will have everything linked down in the description below. So make sure you do that, and we will see you next time on Writing Quest.